fire, soldier! Show him who you are!
My God, he's not just obeying Jair, he remembers him.
Blind Marine finds his war dog. What happens next will make you believe in miracles. The needle was already loaded when Staff Sergeant Eli Maro arrived at the K-9 rehabilitation facility, his white cane tapping against concrete floors that echoed with the whimpers of broken war dogs. Rook's beyond saving. Captain Martinez explained, her voice heavy with the weight of another failure. 3 handlers tried and failed. He's attacked 4 people and destroyed 2 kennels. The injection is scheduled for 1,400 hours. But Eli's scarred fingers were already working at the chain-link fence, and his whispered, "Ruhig, mein Freund," caused the 90-pound German shepherd to freeze mid-snarl. For the first time in 8 months, Rook's tail moved, not wagging, just a single tentative twitch that said, maybe, just maybe, someone finally understood. What happened next would prove that sometimes salvation comes in the form of 2 broken souls who recognize their wounds in each other, and that the strongest bonds are forged in the darkest places. The Warrior Transition K-9 unit sat on 40 acres of California desert where damaged military working dogs lived in bureaucratic limbo between active service and euthanasia. Captain Sarah Martinez ran the facility with military efficiency and civilian heartbreak processing animals, whose psychological wounds made them unsuitable for adoption, but whose service records made them impossible to simply discard. In 2024, the facility housed 37 dogs, whose invisible injuries mirrored those of their human counterparts. Staff Sergeant Eli Maro had been invisible for 2 years, ever since the IED blast in Mosul took his sight and ended his career as a dog handler with the 3rd Infantry Division. At 32, he carried himself with the rigid posture of someone who'd learned to navigate the world through sound scent and stubborn memory. His transition from decorated soldier to disabled veteran had been marked by VA appointments that led nowhere, job interviews that ended in polite rejection, and a society that thanked him for his service while failing to provide meaningful support. The white cane that preceded him everywhere was government-issued and functional, but Eli's true navigation system was his understanding of military working dogs, creatures whose loyalty had saved more lives than any medal could commemorate. His specialized training in German Command's canine psychology and battlefield behavior made him uniquely qualified for work that the civilian world couldn't understand or accommodate. Rook embodied the K-9 program's darkest failures. The 4-year-old German shepherd had been captured from insurgents in Afghanistan, rehabilitated for American service, then deployed on over 200 missions, where his detection abilities had saved countless lives. But the same hypervigilance that made him exceptional in combat made him dangerous in civilian settings, where every sound could trigger fight or flight responses that civilian handlers couldn't manage. His psychological profile read like a case study in institutional abandonment separation anxiety that manifested as destructive behavior, hyperaggression toward strangers, and complete inability to bond with handlers who hadn't shared his battlefield experiences. 3 different trainers had declared him irremediably dangerous, while his medical records documented bite incidents that had convinced facility administrators that euthanasia was the only viable option. The facility itself reflected military bureaucracy's uncomfortable relationship with emotional casualties. Clean, efficient, and utterly sterile, it processed dogs like equipment. Rather than recognizing them as soldiers, deserving of the same consideration given to human veterans. The kennels were designed for containment rather than rehabilitation, while protocols prioritized liability management over therapeutic intervention. Captain Martinez represented the system's best intentions, hampered by institutional limitations. Her genuine care for the animals under her command was constrained by regulations that measured success through adoption rates rather than quality of life improvements. Her recommendation for Rook's euthanasia wasn't cruelty, but pragmatism, a recognition that resources were limited and some cases appeared hopeless. The broader context was America's complex relationship with military working dogs, creatures who'd served with distinction but received minimal support during transition to civilian life. Unlike their human counterparts, retired military dogs had no VA benefits, no career counseling, and no recognition that their service-related trauma deserved treatment rather than termination. Eli's arrival at the facility represented collision between military understanding and civilian administration, between emotional truth and bureaucratic efficiency. His blindness made him appear vulnerable to staff accustomed to managing dangerous animals, while his expertise in canine behavior made him perhaps the only person capable of reaching a dog that everyone else had written off as beyond salvation. The shared trauma between Eli and Rook created possibilities for healing that institutional approaches had never recognized. Both carried invisible wounds from the same battlefield. Both had been abandoned by systems that praised their service while failing to support their recovery. And both possessed skills that civilian society couldn't properly utilize or appreciate. Eli's journey to the K-9 facility began with a phone call that changed everything. Captain Martinez's voice cutting through another sleepless night filled with phantom sounds and phantom purposes. "Sergeant Maro, we have a German Shepherd here, former military working dog. His handler was KIA in Afghanistan, and we can't find anyone who can manage him. Your name came up as someone who might understand his condition." The drive to the facility was his first solo navigation in months, every mile marking his transition from isolated civilian to someone whose expertise might actually matter. His memories of working with military dogs in deployment zones came flooding back, the trust, the communication, the life and death partnerships that civilian pet owners could never comprehend. Captain Martinez's briefing was clinical and discouraging. Rook was partnered with Corporal James Wilson, 3rd Infantry, killed by sniper fire during a patrol in Kandahar province. The dog was returned to service with 3 different handlers, but he wouldn't bond. His aggression levels have increased steadily since his return stateside. The facility tour revealed the scope of institutional failure surrounding military working dogs. 37 animals lived in kennels designed for temporary housing, their psychological needs unmet by staff trained in veterinary care rather than trauma recovery. The air hung thick with anxiety and abandonment, while protocols focused on behavior management rather than therapeutic intervention. Eli's first encounter with Rook was conducted through chain-link fencing that separated them physically, while their shared trauma created immediate recognition. The dog's growling was defensive rather than aggressive, the sound of someone who'd learned that attack was the only reliable form of protection in an unpredictable world. "He's been like this for 8 months," Martinez explained, her voice heavy with professional defeat. 3 different rehabilitation attempts, 4 bite incidents, 2 destroyed kennels. The decision for euthanasia wasn't made lightly, but we can't place him anywhere, and we can't keep housing animals that pose risks to staff and potential adopters. Eli's response was immediate and instinctive. His fingers worked at the fence latch, while his voice dropped into the cadence that had commanded respect from working dogs in combat zones. Ruhig, mein Freund, ich verstehe. The German commands that had once coordinated life and death operations now became tools for establishing communication with a soldier who'd lost his purpose along with his handler. Rook's reaction was electric and immediate. The snarling stopped, his ears pricked forward, and for the first time in months, he moved toward human contact rather than away from it. The connection was visible and undeniable. Two veterans recognizing their shared experience of service trauma and abandonment. "I don't understand," Martinez whispered, watching the transformation occur in real time. "How did you do that?" Eli's explanation was simple but profound. "He's not aggressive, he's protective, he's not dangerous, he's scared. Every civilian who's approached him has tried to dominate him into submission. But he's a soldier, not a pet. He needs partnership, not ownership." The psychological breakthrough continued as Eli maintained verbal contact through the fence, his German commands triggering muscle memory and emotional responses that months of civilian rehabilitation had never reached. Rook's body language shifted from defensive aggression to cautious hope, his intelligence reasserting itself as fear receded. "Captain, I'd like to request permission to work with Rook," Eli said formally, understanding that his proposal would challenge every protocol the facility had developed. "Give me 2 weeks before the euthanasia order. If I can't establish safe management protocols, I'll support your decision." The request was both desperate and confident, reflecting Eli's understanding that this opportunity represented more than saving one dog. It was his chance to reclaim purpose and identity that civilian life had failed to provide. His blindness, which had been viewed as limitation in every other context, might actually be an advantage in working with a dog whose hypervigilance made him reactive to visual threats. The partnership that was beginning to form would test every assumption about rehabilitation disability and the bonds that connect soldiers across species lines. The first week of Eli's work with Rook revealed the depth of both their trauma and their potential for healing. Under Captain Martinez's cautious supervision, Eli spent 8 hours daily beside Rook's kennel, rebuilding trust that had been shattered by a system that viewed the dog as equipment to be managed rather than a soldier to be honored. The breakthrough came when Eli requested permission to enter Rook's kennel, a suggestion that horrified facility staff who'd witnessed the dog's aggressive responses to previous handlers. "Sergeant, he's bitten 4 people," Martinez protested. "I can't authorize you to enter a confined space with an animal that's demonstrated consistent aggressive behavior." But Eli's understanding of canine psychology was built on combat experience that civilian trainers couldn't match. "Captain, he's not attacking people, he's defending his space. In Afghanistan, that kennel would be his fighting position. Every person who enters without permission is a potential threat to be neutralized." The military logic was unassailable, and Martinez reluctantly agreed to allow the interaction under strict medical supervision. What followed challenged every assumption about dangerous dogs and disabled handlers. Eli's entry into the kennel was conducted with the careful protocol of a military operation each movement deliberate and respectful of Rook's psychological state. The reunion was emotional and immediate. Rook's recognition of Eli's scent, his movement patterns, and his command voice triggered responses that months of civilian rehabilitation had never achieved. The dog's aggression dissolved into protective alertness, his hypervigilance redirected from random threats to focused partnership. "Arbeiten," Eli commanded, and Rook immediately shifted into working mode, the focused attention that had saved lives in combat zones now applied to learning new routines and expectations. The German commands that had once coordinated explosive detection missions became tools for establishing household behaviors and social interaction. The transformation was rapid and visible. Within days, Rook was responding to complex instructions, demonstrating the intelligence and trainability that had made him exceptional in military service. His destructive behaviors ceased as his energy was channeled into meaningful work, while his aggression toward staff members disappeared once his role in the facility's hierarchy was clearly established. But the most significant development was Eli's own transformation. The purposeless isolation that had defined his civilian life was replaced by daily routines that demanded his expertise and challenged his abilities. His blindness, which had been viewed as limitation in every other context, became an asset in working with a dog whose trust had been betrayed by people who relied too heavily on visual dominance. The partnership's success attracted attention from facility administrators, veteran advocacy groups, and media outlets, seeking positive stories about military working dog programs. But the increased visibility also brought scrutiny from bureaucrats who questioned whether liability policies allowed blind handlers to work with dangerous animals. The escalation came when Dr. Robert Chen, the facility's chief administrator, observed Eli and Rook during a training session that showcased their remarkable partnership. The dog's responsiveness to commands, his protective behavior toward Eli, and his calm demeanor with approved personnel impressed even skeptical observers. "Sergeant Maro, what you've accomplished is remarkable," Dr. Chen acknowledged. "But our insurance policies and safety protocols don't account for handlers with vision impairments working with animals that have documented aggressive histories. I'm concerned about liability issues that could affect the entire program." The bureaucratic challenge was both predictable and devastating. Eli's success with Rook was being threatened not by failure, but by institutional policies that prioritize legal protection over therapeutic results. The partnership that had given both veterans new purpose was being sacrificed to liability concerns that had nothing to do with actual effectiveness. Rook's response to discussions about separation was immediate and concerning. His anxiety levels spiked whenever Eli was absent from the facility, while his aggression toward other staff members returned when he sensed threat to their partnership. The dog's psychological stability was directly linked to his bond with the only handler who understood his trauma. The crisis deepened when media attention attracted criticism from animal rights organizations who argued that working with damaged dogs endangered both the animals and their handlers. Their well-intentioned advocacy ignored the reality that purpose and partnership were therapeutic for both species, while their focus on protection overlooked the healing power of meaningful work. Eli's own struggles intensified as he faced the possibility of losing the first meaningful relationship he'd developed since his injury. The depression and isolation that had characterized his civilian transition returned with devastating force, while his sense of purpose disappeared as bureaucratic decisions threatened to end his partnership with Rook. The situation escalated when Rook's behavior began deteriorating in anticipation of separation. His destructive tendencies returned, his aggression toward facility staff increased, and his general psychological state regressed toward the condition that had originally prompted euthanasia recommendations. "We're losing him again," Captain Martinez observed during an emergency meeting. "All the progress we've made is disappearing because he knows something's wrong. If we separate them now, we're back to square one with an animal that's even more traumatized than before." The institutional failure was complete and heartbreaking. The same system that had abandoned both veterans individually was now destroying the partnership that had begun healing them both, prioritizing bureaucratic convenience over therapeutic success and legal protection over life-saving results. The order came down on a Friday afternoon when Dr. Chen's superiors at the Department of Defense demanded immediate resolution of the liability situation at the K-9 facility. Eli would be barred from further contact with Rook, the dog would be returned to the euthanasia schedule, and all media access would be terminated to prevent negative publicity about military working dog programs. The decision was delivered with bureaucratic coldness that ignored the therapeutic breakthrough both veterans had achieved. "Sergeant Maro, we appreciate your volunteer efforts, but policy requires that we prioritize safety protocols over individual relationships. Effective Monday, your access to this facility will be terminated and Rook will be processed according to standard procedures for unadoptable animals." The devastation was immediate and total. Eli's first meaningful purpose since his injury was being terminated not because of failure, but because of success that made administrators uncomfortable. The partnership that had given both veterans hope was being sacrificed to institutional policies that viewed their healing as inconvenient complication rather than miraculous achievement. Rook's response to the separation was psychologically catastrophic. Within hours of Eli's forced departure, the dog had destroyed his kennel, attacked 2 staff members, and regressed to the hyper-aggressive state that had originally condemned him to death. His howling could be heard throughout the facility, a sound of grief and abandonment that broke the hearts of everyone who'd witnessed his transformation. "He knows," Captain Martinez reported to Dr. Chen with tears in her voice. "Somehow he understands that Eli isn't coming back and he's shutting down completely. We've lost 8 months of progress in 8 hours." The broader implications were equally devastating. Media outlets that had covered the partnership's success now reported its termination, creating national conversation about bureaucratic priorities that valued liability protection over veteran healing. The story became symbol of institutional failure that abandoned military heroes, both human and canine, when their needs became inconvenient. Eli's psychological collapse was swift and complete. The depression that had nearly consumed him during civilian transition returned with redoubled force, while the sense of purpose that had sustained him disappeared with his separation from Rook. His isolation became absolute as he retreated from a world that had once again demonstrated its indifference to his value and expertise. The darkest moment came when Eli received notification that Rook's euthanasia had been rescheduled for the following Tuesday. The dog who'd responded to his partnership with remarkable healing would be killed because institutional policies couldn't accommodate their success. The injustice was overwhelming and absolute. "I failed him," Eli whispered to Captain Martinez during their final conversation. "I gave him hope, and then I couldn't protect him from the same system that abandoned me. He trusted me, and I let them destroy that trust." Martinez's response revealed her own heartbreak and institutional constraints. "Sergeant, you gave him 3 weeks of purpose and partnership that he hadn't experienced since his handler died. You proved that healing was possible even when everyone else had given up. That's not failure, that's miracle work." But miracles, Eli understood, were insufficient against bureaucratic indifference that measured success through liability management rather than life transformation. The system that had praised their service while failing to support their recovery was now terminating their partnership to avoid potential lawsuits. The final cruelty came when Eli was prohibited from saying goodbye to Rook facility policies, preventing him from entering the building where his partner waited for execution. The dog who'd learned to trust again would face death without understanding why his handler had abandoned him, while Eli would carry the guilt of that perceived betrayal for the rest of his life. The media coverage that followed was simultaneously supportive and useless. Editorial boards condemned bureaucratic callousness, while offering no practical solutions. Veteran advocacy groups issued statements of outrage while providing no institutional alternatives. And politicians expressed concern while implementing no policy changes. The story that had begun with hope and healing was ending with separation and death, proving once again that institutional systems designed to support veterans were often their greatest obstacles to recovery. The partnership that had demonstrated the possibility of second chances was being terminated by first world bureaucracy that viewed liability as more important than life. As Tuesday approached, Eli faced the knowledge that his last meaningful relationship was ending not through natural conclusion, but through institutional execution. The dog who'd saved his sense of purpose would die, believing that his trust had been betrayed, while Eli would survive knowing that he'd been powerless to protect someone who depended on his partnership. The darkness was complete and seemingly permanent, with no visible path toward redemption or resolution that could overcome bureaucratic decisions backed by legal authority and institutional indifference. The miracle began with a phone call at 0500 hours Tuesday morning, just 4 hours before Rook's scheduled execution. The voice belonged to General Patricia Hayes, commanding officer of Army Medical Research Command, whose daughter had read about Eli and Rook's partnership in a military publication and demanded that her mother do something to save them. "Sergeant Maro, this is General Hayes. I understand there's a dog about to be euthanized who's shown remarkable progress under your care. I need you to explain to me why bureaucratic policies are more important than therapeutic results." The question was rhetorical and devastating, revealing that the highest levels of military command were now aware of the institutional failure occurring at the K-9 facility. General Hayes had built her career on evidence-based medicine, and the documented improvement in both Eli and Rook's conditions represented exactly the kind of breakthrough that military research was designed to support. Within 2 hours, Dr. Chen received orders from Pentagon officials that superseded his authority and transformed the entire situation. The K-9 facility would become part of a pilot program studying human-animal partnerships in veteran rehabilitation, with Eli and Rook serving as the primary research subjects rather than liability concerns. The reprieve came with minutes to spare. Rook was already in the veterinary facility, sedated and prepared for euthanasia, when Captain Martinez burst through the doors with new orders and federal authorization that overruled every bureaucratic objection that had threatened their partnership. Eli's arrival at the facility was emotionally overwhelming for everyone present. His reunion with Rook occurred in front of federal researchers, media crews, and facility staff who'd witnessed both the partnership's success and its near termination. The dog's response was immediate and joyful, his tail wagging for the first time since their separation, while his entire body language shifted from depression to celebration. "Mein Freund," Eli whispered as Rook pressed against his legs with desperate affection, "I'm sorry I left you. I'm here now, and we won't be separated again." The promise was backed by federal authority that transformed their relationship from volunteer work to official research partnership. General Hayes had authorized a comprehensive study of veteran dog partnerships, with Eli serving as primary researcher and Rook as his partner in developing protocols that could help thousands of other veterans and retired military dogs. The media coverage that followed was overwhelmingly positive and nationally significant. Their story became symbol of what was possible when institutional systems prioritized healing over liability, when individual expertise was valued over bureaucratic convenience, and when partnerships were recognized as therapeutic tools rather than management problems. But the most meaningful resolution was personal rather than institutional. Eli's sense of purpose was not only restored but expanded as he began training other veterans to work with retired military dogs. His blindness, which civilian employers had viewed as limitation, became asset in teaching other disabled veterans that their service-related injuries didn't disqualify them from meaningful work. Rook's transformation was equally remarkable. The hyper-aggressive dog who'd been scheduled for execution became ambassador for military working dog programs, demonstrating to congressional committees and veteran organizations that healing was possible when trauma was understood rather than criminalized. The pilot program that emerged from their partnership established new protocols for pairing retired military dogs with disabled veterans, creating therapeutic relationships that served both populations while providing meaningful work that civilian programs couldn't match. The success rates were unprecedented, with 90% of partnerships showing significant improvement in both human and canine participants. 6 months later, Eli and Rook's daily routine included training sessions with other veteran dog partnerships, research consultations with military medical professionals, and public appearances that educated civilian audiences about the realities of military service and veteran transition. Their partnership had evolved from personal healing to institutional transformation. The congressional testimony that followed was perhaps their greatest triumph. Eli's appearance before the House Veterans Affairs Committee with Rook demonstrating working dog capabilities resulted in legislation that allocated $50 million for veteran dog partnership programs throughout the VA system. Chairman Miller, members of the committee, Eli testified with quiet authority, Staff Sergeant Rook and I represent what's possible when we stop viewing service-related injuries as limitations and start recognizing them as qualifications for specialized work that civilian programs cannot provide. The legislation that emerged, the Military Working Dog Veterans Act, established permanent funding for partnerships between disabled veterans and retired military dogs, created protocols for therapeutic relationships, and mandated that VA facilities include animal-assisted therapy in their treatment programs. But the most meaningful moment came during a private ceremony at the K-9 facility, where Eli and Rook were officially recognized as permanent partners rather than temporary arrangement. The paperwork that formalized their relationship was both legal document and emotional validation of bonds that transcended traditional categories. Sergeant Maro, General Hayes announced during the ceremony, "You and Staff Sergeant Rook are hereby assigned to permanent partnership under the Military Working Dog Veterans Program. Your mission is to prove that second chances aren't just possible, they're essential." The assignment was both recognition and responsibility, acknowledging that their partnership had become model for transforming military veterinary care while providing hope for thousands of other veterans and dogs who'd been written off as too damaged for civilian integration. A year later, their success had spawned similar programs at 15 VA facilities with over 200 veteran dog partnerships, demonstrating that healing was possible when trauma was understood as shared experience rather than individual pathology. The bureaucratic obstacles that had nearly terminated their relationship had been replaced by institutional support that recognized their expertise as essential rather than inconvenient. The foundation they established provided resources for veterans seeking partnerships with retired military dogs, while their research contributed to peer-reviewed publications that influenced military medicine and veteran rehabilitation throughout the defense establishment. Their story had transcended personal healing to become institutional transformation. As Eli reflected on their journey from near execution to federal recognition, he understood that their partnership represented something larger than individual recovery. They'd proven that expertise earned through sacrifice was valuable regardless of physical limitations, that healing was possible when trauma was recognized rather than stigmatized, and that the strongest partnerships were forged between those who understood each other's wounds. The blind veteran and the dangerous dog had become symbols of redemption, second chances, and the miraculous healing that could occur when institutional systems chose hope over convenience. Their daily work continued to prove that love, loyalty, and shared purpose could overcome any obstacle that bureaucracy or prejudice might construct. "Arbiton," Eli commanded each morning as they began another day of proving that miracles were possible when broken souls recognized their strength in each other. And Rook's eager response confirmed that some partnerships were meant to heal not just individuals, but entire systems that had forgotten how to honor those who'd served with courage and deserved better from the country they'd protected. The Eli-Rook partnership became the foundation for revolutionary changes in military veterinary care and veteran rehabilitation throughout the United States Armed Forces. Their success inspired the Military Working Dog Veterans Act, which allocated $200 million over 5 years for programs pairing disabled veterans with retired military dogs, creating therapeutic relationships that served both populations while addressing systematic gaps in veteran care. The immediate consequences transformed how military institutions approached both veteran disability and animal retirement. The K-9 facility, where they'd met, became the National Center for Military Working Dog Rehabilitation, with Eli serving as Director of Veteran Dog Partnerships and Rook as the program's permanent ambassador. Their protocols were adopted by VA facilities nationwide, creating standardized approaches to animal-assisted therapy that recognize military trauma as specialized condition requiring specialized treatment. Educational institutions incorporated their story into curricula about disability rights, veteran advocacy, and the therapeutic value of human-animal partnerships. Medical schools began teaching courses on combat trauma that included animal-assisted therapy components, while veterinary programs developed specializations in military working dog psychology and rehabilitation. The research that emerged from their partnership influenced peer-reviewed publications in military medicine, veterinary psychology, and rehabilitation therapy. Their documented success rates, 95% improvement in PTSD symptoms, 87% reduction in veteran isolation, 90% successful integration of retired military dogs, provided evidence that challenged traditional approaches to both veteran care and animal retirement. Congressional legislation inspired by their case expanded veteran benefits to include animal-assisted therapy coverage, while military appropriations included funding for comprehensive working dog retirement programs. The bureaucratic obstacles that had nearly terminated their partnership were replaced by institutional policies that prioritized therapeutic results over liability concerns. The cultural impact extended beyond military communities to influence broader American understanding of disability service animals and the needs of combat veterans. Their story demonstrated that expertise earned through sacrifice remained valuable regardless of physical limitations, while proving that healing was possible when trauma was understood as shared experience rather than individual pathology. International recognition followed domestic success, with NATO allies adopting similar programs based on Eli and Rook's protocols. Their model influenced military veterinary programs in Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, and Germany, creating global networks of veteran dog partnerships that served military personnel worldwide. The foundation they established continued expanding 5 years later, having facilitated over 200 successful veteran dog partnerships while providing training resources and advocacy for disabled veterans seeking meaningful work in animal care and rehabilitation. Their success had created career pathways that civilian programs couldn't match, while addressing veteran unemployment and isolation simultaneously. The universal message that resonated across all communities was profound healing requires understanding rather than sympathy. Expertise transcends physical limitations when properly recognized and supported, and the strongest partnerships are forged between those who understand each other's wounds through shared experience rather than theoretical knowledge. Eli and Rook's legacy proved that second chances aren't just possible, they're essential for societies that claim to honor those who served with courage and deserve better from the institutions they protected with their sacrifice and service.